Agent Kami here. A contributor in one of the alt-left Facebook groups I moderate recently posed this question. I only ask that this post be used for actual Socratic self-analysis and discussion of issues of patriarchy, institutional racism, ableism, and all the isms and oppressed groups, from addicts to poor rural whites to militant urban African Americans. Why should you? Because, do you want to be known as the leftists on the wrong side of history? No, of course not, which is why we must constantly critique ourselves, understand our biases, our ignorance, and aren't we all pretending to be more educated about leftism, even though many here have probably not read a single book by Marx and crew? And privileges, and ultimately fight for left solidarity and the awakening of the intersectional proletariat. Because even the dogmatically anti-SJW must acknowledge that there is a very real split in the left about this now, at a time when the far left is growing at an unprecedented pace thanks to Bernie, as well as needed more than ever because of Trump. Can we afford not to talk about these issues and instead just create groups that are echo chambers for our own beliefs? Shouldn't we attempt to find common ground with the angry radical SJW? For the movement's sake, we must exit our echo chambers and contribute to the public sphere of leftism. Okay, well, truth be told, I don't think that class and identity are so easily separated from one another. If one is to stratify a society, then one needs legitimizing rationalizations for why some people should own and administer the wealth and capital, while others should be stuck doing the legwork required to produce it. This brings to mind the old Platonic notion of the noble lie, the notion of myths used by societies to legitimize their social structures, outlined in Plato's Republic. Since the above post does specifically request Socratic analysis, perhaps I'll allow Socrates himself to explain. Citizens, we shall say unto them in our tale, you are brothers, and yet God has framed you all differently. Some of you have the power of command, and in the composition of these he has mingled gold. Wherefore also they have the greatest honour. Others he has made of silver, to be auxiliaries. Others again, who are to be husbandmen and craftsmen, he is comprised of brass and iron. And the species will generally be preserved in the children. That's right, God has created some people to be superior to others. The superiors have blue blood, or are God's chosen people, or enjoy the divine right of kings, or God removed man's rib and made from that a subservient helpmate, or whatever. As time went on, God didn't wash anymore, and so science took his place. Some races of people evolved to be superior to others. And then these fell out of favor in favor of meritocracy. Some people just work harder or are naturally more gifted than others. That explains the difference in wealth between billionaires in the West, say, and famine victims in sub-Saharan Africa. Just be smarter and work harder. Lies like these echo down through history. Typically, the only thing noble about them is the strata of society the tellers of these lies come from. This is the real importance of identity in a class hierarchy. It is important to deconstruct the lie in order to legitimize a more just and equitable social order. To remake the social order without taking apart the lie that upholds it may distribute power and wealth more equitably, but remain unjust in that it allows old prejudices based on the lie to linger unchallenged and ultimately undermine the very egalitarian aims that drove the reformation of the social order in the first place. The problem with identity politics, though, is that, divorced from class analysis, it essentially mistakes the lie for the social structure the lie itself was told in order to legitimize. An unjust social order left intact, The deconstruction of the old noble lie merely becomes a new noble lie all of its own. You could thus end up with a republic where the silver people cast down the gold with the aid of the brass and the iron, only for the silver people to become what the gold once were. Or maybe the gold people are left enthroned, but the silver, the brass, and the iron people periodically trade places, and are more inclined to quarrel among themselves over who is more privileged and who is more marginalized, than they are in actually trying to substantially change the order. That seems to be the problem of the present era. I just don't think common ground with the angry radical SJW is possible right now. The problem is the fanaticism and the true believer mindset. This is also a problem with the hardline, vulgar Marxist class reductionists, but they haven't really been the problem in the last generation. The ID poll SJWs have been. Back in the days of the old left, the opposite was true. So there's a lot of frustration with the SJWs now, and I don't think this frustration always stems from a mere desire to retain privilege or out of bigotry and hatred towards anybody, although that no doubt is true in some cases. But this is impossible to explain to most SJWs without them turning into bitter, caustic assholes, and this is the real problem with them. Their thinking is very closed and very circular. You can't discuss anything with them because their marginalized identities make them infallible. Any kind of relationship with them is impossible because they're completely incapable of seeing any kind of heterosexual or mixed-race relationship in anything other than ideological terms. And they're not interested in discussing. They're interested in dictating. They're not interested in equality and solidarity. They're interested in supremacy and separation. Their levels of militancy and self-righteousness, glorified in the culture of radical leftism, approach jihadist levels. What common ground can be found with this? SJWs ask of us how we're supposed to gain the solidarity of marginalized peoples without addressing their issues, but this question can also be put to them. How do you expect cishet white males to ally with marginalized groups who think that their status as victims makes it okay to shit all over, scapegoat, and shame their allies all the time? If, after a decade of Tumblr and BuzzFeed, after a decade of shrill screaming about white fragility or mansplaining, if even white male progressives, let alone moderates and conservatives, are giving feminism and Black Lives Matter the middle finger, well, honestly, I can't say I blame them. The constant use of the term entitlement by the SJWs starts looking more and more like projection all the time. Which is not to say that white cishet male progressives are without sin vis-a-vis their more marginalized counterparts. I would counsel no one to be blind in their self-righteousness. At times, I really do think my race and my gender doth protest too much. Would it really kill us to actually give ID poll theorists a fair hearing and consider what they say from time to time? And can we honestly call ourselves progressives if we don't? I'm all for common ground, but this preoccupation with being the specialist snowflake in the drift and scoring gold in the oppression Olympics, since this apparently implies some kind of moral superiority, sure the hell is not going to succeed where class reductionism and overlooking racial and gender oppression has allegedly failed. Hell, social justice warriors turn on white feminists, declare that black cishet males are the white people of black people, and expel white cis gay males from LGBTQ caucuses for not being marginalized enough. And they talk to me of solidarity? Please. The self-righteousness and completely self-absorbed obsessions with ideological and identitarian purity on the ID poll left is what drove many of us to think left-wing politics needed a reboot in the first place. Common ground can be had, but everybody has to do their part to make it happen. And honestly, I think class politics is the middle ground. Class solidarity is a harsh taskmaster where identity is concerned. It leaves no room for racism or supremacist views. Solidarity will fail otherwise, and this has happened to tragic results multiple times throughout history. I harbor no illusions that I'm going to have to band together with people of all kinds of racial, sexual, and other backgrounds if I'm going to have a chance against the powers that be. There can be no first among equals if it is to truly work. There is a place for obstinate white cishet males to play the victim themselves, and that place is on the alt-right. And if you haven't noticed, we don't like them and they don't like us either. Class-based politics promises no panacea, but offers material improvements for all based on how far down the societal ladder they are. If the lower rungs have higher concentrations of women, minorities, etc., then they will be the ones to disproportionately benefit. And maybe that's the best we're going to do for now. Where I see resistance to class-based politics from ID-pol radical leftists, I see a lot more concern with ego and being recognized as the specialist snowflake of them all, rather than an interest in actually overcoming anything, and that perhaps class isn't an issue for a lot of them because that's a form of privilege they have, having attended Ivy League colleges and so on, and aren't willing to themselves self-reflect on. In short, SJW narratives, no less than vulgar Marxist narratives, become not-so-noble lies all of their own. This has been Agent Kami, over and out.